Hey everyone, it's Debbie Potts. I'm the host of the Low Carb Athlete, and we've had that podcast for 10 years. I started doing Ironman triathlons when I was, 29, and suddenly I'm 50. I raced 2001 until 2012 and tried for the next 2 years until about 2015 when I realized I was broken. I burned out my body systems and couldn't race anymore. So now my passion and my purpose is to help you fellow endurance athletes to avoid going into that dark hole that I did, adrenal exhaustion, HPA axis dysfunction, metabolic chaos, whatever you want to call it. Because I was doing all the right things way before keto, low carb, and fasted exercise was a thing. I started dabbling into this area back in about 2005, 2007 with metabolic efficiency testing and more. So today we're going to go over what I call the holistic method, 8 elements to help you be the best version of yourself so you can perform your best in life and sports. So let's get started. Now, I want to go over these elements, but I have so much to talk about. So we're going to make this into another ebook on my website, debbiepotts.net. Now, what is my why? I always ask all my clients, what's your why? I ask my podcast guests, I'm going to ask you, what is your why? For me, I am helping other people as myself, driven, ambitious, high performing, high charging athletes who are struggling to do all the right thing and really finding struggle. They can't get their body and vibrant self back again. So that's what happened to me. I started having this metabolic chaos, internal breakdown, and body burnout systems back in 2013. And it wasn't just from doing too many Ironmans and marathons and 50K trail races. It was because I was doing too much of everything, too much endurance training, too much stress from running my own fitness studio that luckily I closed October 2019 and found a new sense of happiness, a little less stress doing that. So that was a major bit stressor for me. I found, endurance training is my happy place. I love being in the outdoors. If you can see me in the video, I'm in my little glass house here. We moved 2 years ago from Seattle to North San Diego finally because I was set free from COVID. Let us work online. And luckily I closed my fitness studio, as I said, so I wasn't tied to a location and a big rent every month. So I was, as I said, doing all the right things. Let's go over that. What does that mean? I started Heart Zone training very in the beginning with Sally Edwards. I was one of her coaches for Danskin Triathlon way back when you might not even have been born, 95. I think we started and doing Heart Zone training in Danskin Triathlon camps. We did Heart Zone training where I worked at the Bellevue Club and really started doing marathons and endurance racing. Pretty much 2000 was my first marathon, San Diego Rock and Roll Marathon. And then I was doing endurance cycling before that. I didn't add on this slide, but I was doing Seattle to Portland bike rides and right around Mount Rainier bike rides and all these century rides. I thought, well, I just need to swim a little bit more and swim longer distance, and then I can do an Ironman as other friends were doing. So I started doing Ironman Canada and Ironman Coeur d'Alene. And 2001, I started qualifying for Ironman Hawaii. About 2003, I started getting faster because I was training with Mark Allen and then started being on his elite triathlon team in 2003, or no, that was 4. I can't keep track anymore, 2004. And then I started doing faster marathons and I started improving my times and placing my age group in triathlons and running. But cycling was my strongest part of a triathlon. But I was doing the lower heart rate Maffetone training way back when, as Maffetone did train Mark Allen, and how Mark Allen's success as an athlete was doing the low heart rate training as well. So I was doing all that. I started doing metabolic efficiency testing on clients where I used to work at the Bellevue Club starting back in 2005, and really started seeing how we can optimize fat burning during treadmill running and cycling, and then resting metabolism. So I learned a lot there. And now it so much more makes sense knowing what I know now about how chronic stress can impact the whole you and how we have to match our nutrition with their fueling, our training. So the zone diet, that started opening my eyes up. I was a high carb person for sure. I avoided fat. I avoided protein because I was kind of vegetarian. And anyways, I got into more of the low carb fueling and fasted workouts back in 2009, listening to some other people that were speaking out as Bob Seebehor. I started more low carb, high fat, doing the fat coffee, the bulletproof coffee when it started. And then I was doing Ironmans, kind of putting that fueling strategy into my racing the last few years until I stopped being able to race in 2013. So I was doing all this long time ago, and it worked for only so much time, right? I will tell you more as we get going. So lessons learned, less is more, the Goldilocks effect, N=1. It's all experiment and a journey, as there's not one size fits all. It's a starting point that I work with clients on, starting with your foundations. We want to have positive mindset, self-care, self-love, listening to our intuition, paying attention to those big red flags, not strong arming and pushing through it, pushing past, taking these little pauses, reset, and embracing the aging process, not blaming your age as an excuse. So today we're going to talk about the holistic method, but I really want to see what you want to learn. And, I can go different directions: metabolic flexibility, fat adaptation process, and how to match fueling and training. And then I have even more slides that I'll make into an ebook on fasted or fed exercise, and then training and fueling the female athlete is what I'm working on. So what is the low carb athlete? Low carb, healthy fat, or you could say low carb, high fat, lower carb fuel plan for athletes. Because you think about it, as an endurance athlete, we are burning ideally primarily fat fuel because our fat tank has, say, 40 to 80,000 calories stored in our body. Our glycogen tank has only, say, 2,000 calories. So we will talk today about how to optimize that fat burning engine and figure out how we eat to optimize that. And then where do we place those carbohydrates? So we want to be metabolically flexible, become a fat burner as your main engine, but learn how to turn on that strategic carb timing we talk about when I'm coaching athletes on how to place those carbs in a strategic time so they can give you more boost, more power towards the end of a workout. So S Fuels is one company I started talking to back in 2018 at Ironman Hawaii. They were kind of starting into that metabolic efficiency, fat adapted athlete fuel plan, as well as Generation UCAN. There's, different fuels for different people, as we all have different bodies and guts. But I really love the mindset that S Fuels has about going longer by training your fat engine to burn fat while you're training. And I love Dr. Dan Plews, and Paul Larson really goes into what I've been looking at for years, and talking to Phil Maffetone 15 years ago really helps learn all this information, how we can improve our fat burning as an athlete from going 0.3 grams per hour of fat oxidation to up over 1.2 grams per hour. So metabolic efficiency, I enlarge this picture so you can see it, but if you can see a high carb diet, they're burning some fat, but not as much as we could. So it's probably like 50-50. But if you look at the low carb athlete, they're burning primarily fat for their fuel. Now, I don't think I get into this webinar, but I think I'd like to share sometime in the future about ketones are necessary for some sports, that we shouldn't strive to be in nutritional ketosis while we're in a race, but being a fat adapted athlete, being able to have that metabolic flexibility so we can expand that range where we're burning as much fat as possible. Then eventually, if you did a metabolic test, that you'd see your metabolic crossover point is higher up. As once I was being tested at my prime as a triathlete, I was at maybe 40 years old, 35 to 40, I forget, but I had fat burning up at 160 something heart rate, and I was still burning a high percentage of fat. Then I eventually switched over, but it is possible to be more metabolically efficient and expand that crossover point higher and higher. Now, Peter Defty is another mentor about what he calls optimal fat metabolism, OFM, and how, Peter talks a lot about what I speak about is metabolic efficiency, is bioindividuality when it comes to figure out your nutrition as an athlete. And that ketones, we shouldn't be chasing ketones, but looking at burning fat and having that strategic carb placement. So training the right way, say 80% as aerobic fat burning heart rate ranges, and then 20% of a little more anaerobic when appropriate after you build your base. But hardcore keto, Peter always says, can create adrenal stress and limit performance. So we need not to be scared, as even Rob Wolf says, as scared of carbohydrates and scared of not being in ketosis. And I hear this a lot from our endurance athletes when they come into our Keto for Endurance Facebook group page, that they're trying to keep in ketosis in a ride or race. And I don't think there's research showing that that's necessary, that carbs can improve your performance at the right timing. And that's what we'll talk later about, training low carb, and then racing high, adding in high carbs a day, 2 days before a race and on race day. So optimal fat metabolism, OFM, teaches you how to burn fat, not always showing nutritional ketosis. We're glycogen burning at higher intensity workouts. So remember that when you're racing at high heart rate, you're not burning 100% fat. You're burning some carbs, or a lot more carbs when you're racing, especially towards the end of a race. So carbs and glucose are used for that fight or flight energy. Strategic carb fueling is your backup rocket fuel. So optimal fat metabolism, Peter talks about in his website program, and we'll talk about Dan Plews and Dr. Bubbs, as well as my opinions, that the OFM model really teaches you how to be an intuitive athlete and knowing when to put in those carbs and cutting down your nutrition in half on a race when you are a fat burning athlete. So you have less GI stress because you're not trying to feed your body all that fuel. And that's really how I got into all of this. When I was racing Ironmans back in 2001, I think the first few years I spent half the bike ride throwing up because I was trying to toss down 300 calories an hour on these drink mix. And I had red tape marker on my bottle trying to track how much fluid I had with how many calories every hour in my gel flask. And I was forcing my body to have so much fuel it wouldn't absorb. And I was always TMI, but throwing up on the side of the bike ride. And we always joke that I'll feel better when I get the throw up out of me. So, really optimal fat metabolism, fat adapted athlete, whatever your term is, it's really important for performance and longevity as an athlete. Optimal fat metabolism resets your body back to burning your fat as fuel. And as you can see in a recent podcast I did with Peter on my show, The Low Carb Athlete, we put some graphs into the video and into the blog post I put on my debbiepotts.net website on fasted elite athletes running on a treadmill. And then when they added in Vespa, how their performance changed. They could go longer and continue burning fat for a longer period of time. So what is the holistic method? I coach my clients personally, or rather a personalized coaching program on their nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress, movement, mobility, digestion, gut health, hydration, and number 8, happiness and play. As I didn't know until last 2 years, how important happiness, play, and laughter is as a driven, high-performing type A, AAA athlete. I realized looking back, I was pretty wound up and intense. So I talk to clients about what they eat, how, when, why, and even where. We work on personalized nutrition program of what to eat by looking at genetics, looking at their stress, maybe taking the HPA axis testing, their cortisol levels and other hormones with a Dutch test, looking at their ancestry background. What did your ancestors eat? What part of the world are you coming from? It's going to be different in Northern Europe versus Asia or South America. Now, measuring with ketones, a continuous glucose monitor is really important for athletes trying to figure out what works for them. I use a metabolic typing chart to figure out, okay, how do you feel when you're eating that food? Pay attention to how you feel afterwards. And then I also like to look at genetics like DNA Fit or My DNA, or I just work with a company on, actually I just got in the mail today, the DNA company to get some other markers. So what do you eat as a low carb athlete? Well, this is me in Lava Man Triathlon a few months ago. I've really focused on what Dr. Gabrielle Leon says, and we hear more and more about from other functional medicine experts, Cynthia Thurlow, Vanazati, Sean Baker. We're hearing importance of eating protein, animal meat. And as an athlete and someone that was trying to do too much fasting, which we'll talk about in part 2, less is more of fasting so we can get in our macros of protein. So if I'm trying to get 150 grams of protein a day, that's really difficult if I'm eating in a 5-hour time restricted eating window. So I've been experimenting with lifting weights 3-4 days a week and then eating more protein throughout the day and not being so strict and rigid on my time restricted eating intermittent fasting window, because I want to build muscle and get lean and strong, especially as I turn 50. So prioritizing protein is really essential. There's some guidelines say 0.55 to 0.8 up to 1 gram of protein per pound of your goal body weight. So looking at that, but also I look at spreading it out 3 to 4 hours, having bone broth, drinking that a cup or 2 a day for gut health repair, essential amino acids as from Keon before and after, sometimes even during workouts, depending on the workout, and then in the evening before bed. Dr. Gabrielle has great information on her new podcast in her website, but muscles make up of 45% of our body mass, and that muscle is an endocrine organ and regulates your metabolism and can help reduce inflammation. So we need to make sure we prioritize that muscle. So Dr. Gabrielle Leon, you can look up her protocol, but just kind of as I mentioned, and then choosing foods, what foods to eat. We look at the most nutrient dense food. So if I don't eat organ meat, I just started eating red meat a couple of years ago, thanks to my KetoCon friends, but I do Paleo Valley organ complex instead of eating liver or animal organs. But bone broth I can do. I'm not going to do sweetbreads, but this is a list from my friend Brad Kearns, has over on his website, bradkearns.com, on the carnivore scores, a food ranking chart. So he put together this great chart. Nutrition hacks. I've been doing some ketone IQ from HVMN that are at KetoCon as well. I like using BioOptimizers, Capex, as well as their magnesium. I always suggest to my clients to take at nighttime. I've been using NutriSense, Bonafide Provisions, they're at KetoCon as well, bone broth, and then Vibrant Blue Oils. My friend Jody's company will be at conferences too that we go to, but the parasympathetic oil on my vagal nerve to help stimulate my vagal nerve, my HRV, but also for digestion and for sleep. So I'll take that before bed, but you can also just keep it in your bag and take it when you're stressed out or before you eat, because the parasympathetic nervous system is your rest and digest. So I look at all these with clients, looking at Dr. Anna Quebeca has a great book out I love called The Menu Pause, has 6-day food plans, working with NutriSensor levels, as I said, tracking with Aura or Whoop, really testing our heart rate variability. Your REM and deep sleep is essential for athletes for recovery and repair, working on digestion, your gut health, all sorts of things. So testing and not guessing. So Dr. Dan Plews, I've been taking his program called Endure IQ, and he really breaks it up for the athletes on phases to be fat adapted. So 3 phases: baseline, whole foods, and then the cold keto program. And he breaks it up. And then we talk about with my athletes how to do this and train. So baseline, say you're doing that a few weeks, and then 2 weeks, you're doing whole foods. And then the hard reset, as Peter says, is called the cold keto with Dr. Dan Plews, but you want to add 2 HIIT trainings in a week. So you keep stimulating that glycogen fuel program. And phase 4 is finding your sweet spot that you keep doing for life, but over 2 to 3 weeks. So baseline, kind of go into that with my clients. There's stage 2 whole foods, and then stage 3 cold keto where you're going down to 50 grams. And then when you get into phase 4, you're doing sweet spot, finding your right amount to balance your blood sugar and not have the big spikes. That's why we want to use Keto Mojo or NutriSense or Levels to track your ketones and your glucose once in a while. You don't have to do it all the time. Less is more, remember. So 50 to 130 grams, but some research for male athletes at least can take 200 to 300 grams of carbs a day and still be burning fat and not spike their sugar. So going into this with clients, looking at their glucose meters, looking at heart rate variability, tracking everything on chronometer, training peaks, and putting all these metrics together really helps. But it's going to be different for the female athlete, where I'll have a separate webinar I'll do on tracking the female cycle, really mapping out their cycle with a 28-day menstrual cycle, what they can do to optimize their fat burning performance and fasting if they're doing fasting. So Dan Plews has a great example of what to have on a cold keto phase, having a morning fat coffee with MCT oil and collagen. After you work out, maybe have some eggs, sardines, broccoli with some coconut oil. And then he has another cup of coffee with some cream. So, I would say limit your coffee to 2 cups a day, especially before 11 a.m., 12 p.m. max. He likes S-Fuels bar or having some almonds as a snack on a double workout day. Ideally, we don't snack between meals. That means you probably need to eat more. But if you're working out as hard as Dan does as a top age group triathlete Ironman, you might need to eat. And I always say, if you're hungry, use that intuition and eat instead of feeling your body stressed. So if you're working out harder, you might need that snack. Salmon, olive oil, avocado, asparagus for a meal, steak, simple salad, dark chocolate. So he's having 3 meals. And then a couple snacks in there, S-Fuels or almonds is one snack, I guess, 2 different options. So he averages 50 grams total carbs for a day. So that's a ton of food because he's an athlete working out twice a day, and he can still probably show that he's burning fat. So we go over some cold keto phase tips and tricks that we talk about in the Endure program. Dr. Dan Plews, you can check out their website, why you want to do higher intensity workouts during cold keto to keep the body adapting to, still have those carbs, burning those carbs, and it gets used to burning more fat for fuel. Sleeping can be disrupted too. And, having those electrolytes as LMNT in real life. So finding your sweet spot. I like bone broth, as I said, more in the wintertime. I haven't been doing it so much here in the summer, but, bone broth is a great way to get more protein. And then you can add some butter, ghee, MCT oil. Finding that sweet spot is finding 100 to 200 grams of carbs might be what you need when you're exercising. So I map it out for athletes. If it's your a fasting day or a resting day, that's a day you can do more fasting and do less calories and less carbohydrates. Focus on really getting your protein in still and having your fat. So female athletes, we look at adjusting their macros to the luteal phase the week before their cycle. They'll want to add more of those progesterone building vegetables. So, heart rate variability is a great way to test if you're doing too low or high of carbs, glucose, high intensity workouts, if your performance goes down. They talk about, these green foods and orange foods that you can find on the Banting diet. They have that information as well. Tips on finding your sweet spot that listen to your body. So this gives you some information and finding, good carbs. S-Fuels has a good chart on their website. I'll go back here. There's one I found on Diet Doctor, I think. Onion, beetroot, rutabaga, celery, root celery, potato, parsnips, the underground vegetables, then berries, low glycemic vegetables. Those are good, but the starchy vegetables you want to save for more of those double workout days and having them in your evening meal. Maybe they're on your weekend when you're doing a longer bike ride and doing a long run the next day, so you can tolerate a little more carbs. I like looking at Rob Wolf's, his Wire to Eat book I have here, and that's a great 7-day tolerance test that you can do to figure out what is your carb tolerance, to figure out what foods, carbs are 50 grams a serving, and you test them on your glucose. Because some people can't do rice, sweet potatoes, yams, if you have lots of ghee, some butter, sea salt, add things with the avocado. Those are a great way. But here's what I was just saying about the 7-day carb tolerance test is finding 50 grams of effective carbs, and then you test your glucose. So look that up. Ask Fuels is great information as well, and training 80% of your time in that fat burning zone and 20% anaerobic. So Dr. Dan Plews talks about that. Polarized training, we talk about that when I'm coaching for Ben Greenfield's clients. So training and mapping out your fuel. There's S Fuels has great chart on their website for low carb workouts, and then higher or low carb, lower heart rate workouts. And then if you're doing higher intensity, when to add in a little bit more fuel. So training is going to be different than racing. So train low, race high, and then they have race gel. Ketones are something I've looked at, like I've said, HVMN, ketone IQ. I have a client that's doing ultra racing, the adventure racing for 2-3 days, and they have to really make a lot of big decisions. So that's when I think it's appropriate to have ketone IQ in your workout, maybe beforehand, and then maybe after your workout before bed. That'd be great to do as well. So ketones, exogenous ketones, check out HVMN. We have a code, low carb athlete, but that's some great information on there too, as well as in the pictures, energy bits and recovery bits. So N equals 1 on all this. So carb timing, really looking at training low, racing high is what we're looking at when I'm working with clients. And then matching your fueling with training. So nutrient timing is a key, and matching intensity to your fuel. Having essential amino acids pre, during, and after workouts, as I use KetoCon because it's a great research product of their amino acids, and they reformulate them based on research. So finding which carbs help your performance, again, doing that Rob Wolf's carb tolerance test, choosing real food sources as sweet potatoes, root vegetables, and I don't think a lot of people can't do rice, but you can try it. Higher intensity day, you might need a little more carbs. So when to add carbs, some research showing how it helps some people and then didn't. So authors concluded in this study that carbohydrate ingestion during exercise was likely beneficial for a fat adapted athlete during high intensity endurance type exercise as a 4 by 30-minute workout, doing a 4-minute sprint. They had a 30-second sprint, a 4-minute sprint, 20K time trial, and 100K time trial were all measured. And the results were the 4-minute sprint they needed that extra boost, but likely didn't benefit the short sprint or prolonged endurance sprint. So you have to look at what fuel source you're using in your workout, and then that would be matched with your exercise. So just small improvement of 4-minute sprint power, but there wasn't any change in a 30-second sprint power, and there wasn't much improvement. There's a small reduction in a 100K time trial. So it depends what you're doing. So we'll talk about strategic carb timing, using carbs as Peter Defty has on Vespa. We'll talk about with clients cycling in keto. So doing like a 5-1-1. So you're doing 5 days on more of a lower carb food plan. Again, like Dan Plews says, for athletes, a low carb means around 120 grams a day. Some might be 100, or some, I know Ben Greenfield sometimes says you can do 200 grams at night. So low carb doesn't mean zero carb. And then 1 day a week or 2 days, maybe on the weekends, is good to match your longer workouts for triathletes, at least. Ironman, you might add in sweet potatoes, winter squash, or I'm not a big legume fan, but looking at some good starchy carbs that are in season would be great, and cycle them in and out. And then a note on females should avoid keto and fasting that last week before their cycle. So first half of your cycle, kind of towards the middle, day 7 to day 14, it's okay. But towards the end of your cycle, day 20, 28, you don't want to do any of this. So fasted exercise. I'm going to do this in a part 2, but this is a great infographic from Precision Nutrition on fasted duration, exercise intensity, pre-exercise nutrition, and what you're focusing on. So we'll talk about that next. And fasting, if it's appropriate, it's great information on training fasted or not, and research. So we'll talk about that in part 2, to be fed or fasted, and when it's appropriate, if it's strength training or low intensity workout, what should you do? And if you're stressed out, we don't want to add more stress, right? So we'll talk about all these different things next time on the webinar, the Low Carb Athlete Podcast Special Edition. So let me know if you have questions, and I will put this on my YouTube channel. So I look forward to seeing your comments and what more you want to learn about. Thanks, guys.